Peter R. Breggin, MD, is called the conscience of psychiatry for his many decades of successful reform efforts. His scientific and educational work provide the foundation for modern criticism of drugs and ECT and lead the way in promoting more caring and effective therapies. His books include Talking Back to Prozac, Toxic Psychiatry, Medication Madness, Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal, and now, Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety, Understanding and Overcoming Negative Emotions. Welcome to the Dr. Peter Breggin Hour.
Hello, hello, hello. My wonderful audience, you are really in for a treat today. Let me check in and make sure that we can hear her voice. Judith Orloff, are you there? Can I hear you?
I am here.
Oh, my God. I'm so glad. Folks, this is going to be a really important discussion in your life. I know that Judith's experienced enough that it won't make her anxious or nervous, but my wife and I have been looking at some of her books. One of them is The Empath Survival Guide. We are learning from Dr. Judith Orloff to look at people who are considered, quote, highly sensitive, people Judith calls empaths, and to have a deeper understanding of those aspects of ourselves. You know, I'm a funny mixture. I mean, look at my life. I'm a combination empath and warrior. Maybe Judith will comment on that later. My wife is a bit of a warrior, but she's a deep empath, And in my practice, I've been seeing several young women in their teens put on psych drugs when I'm taking off psych drugs. And I'm learning to think more clearly about them as a result of Judith's work. Now, those of you who have listened to me for years have never heard me talk this way. I discount a lot of modern psychology. I have not been inspired by modern psychiatrists, but this is a wonderful exception. And I would guess that probably most of the people who listen to this radio show, especially if you listen more than once to the Dr. Peter Breggin Hour, that you are empaths or you have a lot of empath within you. So I think that you're going to feel in good company today. Let me catch up on a few other things before turning to Judith, and I do hope you'll all be calling in and get a chance to talk to her. You can pick up the phone, 888-874-4888, 888-874-4888. And I'd call soon and get on the line, although we start usually taking our callers at the half hour. And folks who just happen to land on this pod some way or another out there and aren't listening live necessarily even, but you're listening to PRN FM, to Dr. Peter Breggin. And you can hear the archives of years of shows by going to my website, breggin.com, BREGGIN.com. And this is February 20th. So if you're listening on February 20th, you can call in. Otherwise, you can go to the archives. One of the things I hope you'll do is go to the daily news on my website. It's a relatively new feature, fresh daily news. If you want information that's coming out in the literature, information that's coming out in the news that is enlightening to me and interesting to me and to Ginger and to my assistant, you'll find this interesting. So take a look at that. And above all, subscribe free to the frequent alerts. I mean, that's how you're going to really stay in touch. And don't forget also that you can email me directly, dedicated to this show, so that anybody who's just on the web or whatever is not likely to find this email. So I don't get as many as I do on our public emails. It's especially for you. Breggin Live. Great name for an email. BregginLive@hotmail.com. Let me just take a moment and acknowledge the people who have been writing in. And a few weeks ago, I got a very nice note from a woman named Phyllis about love. And Phyllis, I hope that you heard Terry Lynch. You'd written me a few days before Terry Lynch was on. He was on I think, the 30th of January. Oh, and by the way, next week is, let's see, when is open mic going to be? Well, don't forget, the last week of the month. I didn't get very organized about that. But Phyllis, listen to the Terry Lynch show. It's all about love, and then this show is going to be all about love. And Juliana, Terry was on, I think, January 6th. Juliana, who wrote in, tapers can be very slow and painful. A number of you have written in about this. Tapers can be very, very slow and very, very painful at the end. But they're not always like that. But I just want to give you courage to know that that's how it can be. And, have as much love and support as you can get if you're tapering. And hopefully you have a therapist and a prescriber you can trust. But I can't explain why, but those tiny last doses, fractions, can be really, really painful. So let me say hi again to Judith. Judith is a psychiatrist. Judith Orloff, Orloff, and she is in Los Angeles. She sees patients. She specializes in seeing the highly sensitive person, and she specializes in the people that she calls empaths. It would be interesting to get a little history of this concept of empaths. And it's interesting to me that I so emphasize empathic therapy, but I spend so much time reading the bad stuff. God's given me the job of getting out there and talking about drugs and shock treatment and lobotomy and diagnosis and involuntary treatment. So mostly what I read is stuff nobody wants to read, and that is the only way I could possibly explain not coming across her work a long time ago. And Judith, I hope you appreciate that. That could be the only reason, because you really have deserved a lot of attention from me. So, Judith Orloff, welcome to the Dr. Peter Breggin Hour. I am just so glad to have you here.
Oh, I'm honored that you invited me to be on.
Well, then we're doubly honored. And by the way, Judith is going to be an honorary blogger. She's accepted that award as a honored guest blogger is the official name. And in a week or two, probably after Denmark, I'm going to be putting up a couple of her chosen blogs to let folks know about more about her and to honor her work. I'm just very glad to do that. And she's also joined our advisory council. So I'm just very proud to be working with you. Now, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm just going to let you start anywhere you want, Judith, about your background, your past, and anywhere you want.
Yeah. Well, I just want to start with, I wrote the Empath Survival Guide because I'm an empath and I'm also a psychiatrist. And so I wanted to explain to people who are highly sensitive that sometimes they could be emotional sponges and take on the emotions or even physical symptoms of others into their own bodies if they're an empath. And an empath is somebody who doesn't have the ordinary filters up. And so we feel everything, where most people have a different kind of defense, emotional defense system. And as long as I can remember, since I've been a little girl, I've been wide open. And to me, at this point in my life, it's a gift. But sometimes it can be very challenging for people until they learn how not to take on other people's stress. Because being an emotional sponge is wonderful if you're compassionate and intuitive and giving, and you can feel what's positive in another person, but it does not serve you if you take on your mother's anxiety or your husband's depression or whatever other emotions are going around in crowds, because empaths can pick up emotions in crowds, and they don't know how to tell the difference between what they're experiencing and what other people are experiencing. And so one of the first questions you really have to ask yourself is this emotion mine, or am I absorbing it from somebody else? That's a very important question, and I know in traditional psychiatry, it's not really believed. The subtle energy systems of the body, which are the prana, shakti, all kinds of names for it, that penetrate the body and extend beyond it. Traditional medicine doesn't have that context. But if you see the body as a conglomeration of energy fields, then you can see how easy it is if you're sensitive to feel what other people give off, and that's amplified in crowds. And so it's important for you to assess if you are an empath. And in the beginning of the book, there's a 20-question self-assessment test where you can take it and determine if you have any doubts. You can determine if you're an empath. And if you are, that can be a revelation. And so it's important, if you're experiencing exhaustion or anxiety or depression, to assess
Judith, I'm
whether you're an
losing
empath.
you a little bit. It just sounds, you just got a little weak.
It's important to assess if you're an empath.
Good. All right.
Very important. And you can take the 20-question self-assessment test in front of the empath survival guide, and you can self-diagnose. This is something hopefully healthcare practitioners can assist you with, but if they can't, then you can know for yourself. And then that changes the potential care that you're going to get in terms of what strategies you need to learn to protect your energy.
One of the things I find interesting about the way you're talking about it tonight is that the way you're suggesting it is that the difference has to do with filters, not with the essential person. So are we all potentially deep empaths, but we just have this filtering system? So could we open up and be more of an empath, as well as in some ways close down and protect ourselves a little more?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a spectrum of empathy, and regular empathy, which is so beautiful, is that you feel for somebody, you feel their joy, you feel their pain, but regularly empathic people aren't empaths. They don't take on the emotions or energy from other people. And so everybody has the potential to be deeply empathic. But yet the absorption, that's an interesting question. Where does that come from? Is that genetic? Is that as a result of trauma, as being raised by narcissists or alcoholics or neglectful parents? I think there are many different elements that go into becoming an empath. Plus some babies are born as empaths. I worked in labor and delivery in my residency, and it was very clear that some babies came out hugely sensitive and others didn't seem to have that same sensitivity. It's just a difference in temperament too. So I think there are many factors that go into why you might be highly sensitive, why you might be an empath. But it's interesting because on my book tour, what I saw was that more adults are awakening to being an empath when they hadn't been before. It's usually somebody's been an empath most of their life. But what they're finding is with all the intense stress in our world and all of the trauma that's on the news constantly, is that's breaking down people's defense system and making them more aware of their emotions, their sensitivities, and their empathic abilities, which I found fascinating.
I'm just thinking along as you're talking, and one of the images that occurred to me was the contagion of the infant care sections of a hospital, where the nurseries, where infants, if one infant cries, another infant will cry, and then another can cry, and you can have a contagion. And very likely, it would be so interesting to try to study this more. Maybe it's been studied more. The ones who first began crying after the first one cried, they might be born empaths.
It's true. It's true. Perhaps the first ones are the most empathic, and then the contagion, the crying, goes all across the hospital ward. And the same is true in the workplace with emotions such as anxiety. If one person comes in and says, "Oh my God, I'm so afraid I'm going to lose my job today," that fear can spread potentially throughout the entire workplace, so everybody's rattled and shaken from that one person's fear. And similarly, there can be positive emotional contagion, where if someone comes in joyous or with gratitude or just filled with, compassion, that can spread over a workplace too. You see, so we're more sensitive beings than traditional medicine would describe, really, because we're not just flesh and blood, we're not just physiological responses, we're mind, body, and spirit. And so, the way we respond with our sensitivities, is very important. We don't want to shut our sensitivities down. And people who've experienced trauma or criticism, many people who are sensitive have been told, "Oh, you're just overly sensitive," as a put down. Or like my parents told me, "Oh dear, you just need to get a thicker skin," which made me feel like there was something wrong with me as a child. And so a lot of empaths grow up with shame that there's something wrong with them, and that's not true. There's something right with you. The problem is most empaths don't have the guidance on how to balance themselves in a world full of stress. And so once you learn how to do that, and I present various strategies in the book, then you can really enjoy your positive empath qualities, such as intuition, spirituality, compassion, giving, depth, connection to nature. Empaths love nature and the elements, being in water, having deep conversations with people. Empaths love connection, to connect, that heart connection from one person to another. That depth of connection, not just a superficial connection, but really loving people. Letting yourself love people without being afraid of getting swallowed up by, their emotions or their neediness or whatever you're afraid of. You learn how to ground and protect yourself so you don't have to be afraid of that anymore.
Well, it sounds to me like you wanted to take a breath, and that would be the only reason I would interrupt you. And I'm looking at your 20 qualities or so of the empath, and one of the things I find interesting, which I think my wonderful listeners will also find very interesting, is that you talk about people as being both, and you mentioned it earlier, both emotional and physical empaths. And I don't ever think I thought about physical empaths. And, you give a list of things that look like they could be from a number of different sources. But then you start getting very specific. And, for example, I want to mention this to the readers, because you may not be thinking of this. And maybe it's just going to say to you, my gosh, I fit the whole pattern here. Do noises, odors, or nonstop talkers overwhelm me? Do I have chemical sensitivities or a low tolerance for scratchy clothes? Do I prefer taking my own car to places so that I can leave early if I need to? And then going down further, where you talk about things that that which are so much my wife, and they can be me at times, but there's so much Ginger that I find it extremely interesting. For example, I mean, where in the world does this relate to being an empath? But it's just so much my wife, who is the greatest empath I know, and that one is, am I overwhelmed by multitasking? And do I prefer to get to do one thing at a time? And I want to, in a minute, come back, and after I've mentioned maybe one or two more, and ask, where does that fit into being an empath? But it sure does relate to the empath I know best in the world.
Yeah.
Do I feel better in small towns or the country rather than large cities? Well, that's me, and that is so much Ginger. Do I prefer one-to-one interactions and small groups to large gatherings? Very much me and Ginger. Well, I'll leave it at that. Where does being an empath? I mean, the one thing I don't get at all. Where does it respond to? Where does it have to do with preferring not to do multitasking? I mean, if I walked by my beloved and she's working on something and I want to ask her a question, I mean, I stand and I take a deep breath first. Now, of course, I do that sometimes too, but for Ginger, it's so clear that she wants to focus on one thing at a time. What's the relationship between that and being empathic?
Well, it's interesting because of an empath sensitivity, they tend to be prone to sensory overload. So what might not overload another person, such as being asked a question while doing a task, for an empath, it's just extra energy coming in. And so it's too much when you're focused, the joy of focusing on one thing and really focusing your heart and soul. It sounds like Ginger does that on the completion of one thing. And to have another thing added on to that can be quite alarming. And so what's beautiful is that she's able to tell you that. And
yes,
so
yes. And I think what's going to be beautiful after the show is for me to talk about this a little bit more with her, and for me to not get, even one more reason not to get irritable with her, because it deepens my understanding. And your book, the Empathic Survival Guide, I mean, it's really helped me understand the person I love most. That's such a gift, and it's helping her understand herself, and it's helping those of my patients these young women especially, who are getting drugged by psychiatrists, basically because they're highly sensitive people or empaths. Oh, my gosh. But I'll be quiet again. And, I mean, it's so interesting, though, the chemical sensitivity is this package of things which I've never put together as one thing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because what I've always been told as an empath, if I go into a physician or if I have an experience, let's say a side effect to a medication, or if I'm experiencing something in a certain way, they'll look at me and they'll say, well, you're the only one who's ever experienced that.
Oh, God. What never to say to anybody. Go ahead.
No, it's crazy making. And when you don't know better, when you're, not experienced with how ridiculous that statement is, you feel like you've done something wrong, or that you shouldn't be having your experience. Let's say you took a medication and you're seeing purple, but seeing purple isn't written down as a side effect of that drug. It doesn't matter. If you're seeing purple, you're seeing purple, and the experience needs to be respected. So, just for people to watch out for that statement, because it's a real zinger if you're an empath.
Yes, and I think it's a real identifier of people you want to be careful of. I mean, that's another way of looking at it. And I know in my practice, I just continually reminding people that what they're suffering from is so common to all of humanity.
Right.
And then sometimes I'll add that what's so unique is your creativity. But having these painful experiences you really need to know that, you're a part of humanity with this. I don't know if you make that distinction, but I think it's a comfort to people to know there's a difference between the suffering you experience, which is very often going to be common to a lot of people, and some of your creativity, which will be unique, that'll produce the new idea, the new poem, the new music, the new way of talking about love or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. I look at life as we're all here to learn, to emotionally and spiritually grow here on Earth, and that's our primary purpose. And our careers and whatever else, relationships are secondary to that, or they're in service to that goal. Let's put it that way. So, everybody's equal. Everybody, whether you're a psychiatrist, whether you're a filmmaker, whether you're a mother, whoever you are, whatever your role is, we're all equal. We're all, here on Earth learning and growing. But the thing is about being an empath is that if you realize you're an empath, that could help your growth process so much, because as many people tell me, it just fills in a missing piece where you might not have looked at your experiences that way. You may wonder why you're so exhausted or why you're experiencing pain around family, that you're absorbing energy from them or emotions from them. It just puts a different slant on everything, so it can make more sense and it can lessen your pain in that way. But what you don't want to do, and as so many of my empath patients do this, is they take on the pain of the world, where they go by a homeless community and they take on what they perceive as pain. Or they watch the news at night and they take on all the pain of the world. And so they're, exhausted and depressed and anxious. And so you have to take care of yourself a little bit more than that. And, not watch the news at night. Listen to music or poetry, or take a bath. Do something beautiful before your sleep and dream time. Don't traumatize yourself before you go to sleep, which is a very vulnerable state. And so you have to learn self-care as an empath and not talk yourself out of it. Because a lot of people are brought up, a lot of empaths are brought up believing that you're only compassionate if you take away other people's pain. That's your role, is to help others by taking away their pain. And there is nothing further than the truth. That's more like the martyr or the codependent. Now, you can hold space, as you do, I'm sure, for your patients without taking on their issues. We're each in our own lane here on Earth, and learning our own lessons. And, mine really have not much to do with yours in a certain sense. And so learning to have strong boundaries with people, and recognizing your limitations in terms of what you can do at times to help others. Sometimes people aren't receptive to help at a certain point. And empaths tend to be over-helpers. They want to help everybody all the time, and that's not appropriate. You help when there's an opening to help. You don't force your help on others, and you don't want someone else's life to flash before your eyes all the time, so you don't even pay attention to yourself. So empaths often do this. That's why I'm bringing it up. They become codependent or overgiving at the expense of their own well-being.
In my book, Heart of Being Helpful, I call this induced suffering, that when we allow the suffering of others to become our suffering, we can no longer help them adequately because, in fact, we may end up feeling a lot of guilt, shame, and anxiety being induced in us, and we may start to get irritable and angry that we are suffering with somebody else's suffering. And so I've always tried to talk about and to act on the basis of feeling love as much as possible in my interactions with people at all times and in all places. Although I just think of a major exception when I'm dealing with some of these terrible lawyers defending terrible doctors in depositions, like yesterday. My empathy for the lawyer questioning me and his doctor became diminished, but or at least my sympathy and concern. But I think it's so important to not allow the induction of suffering. And so I agree with you so much that, and to create what I try to create in therapy and in my life is a healing presence on my part.
Right.
I like to be with people who have a healing presence.
Right.
Because just being a loving human being, we heal each other. So again, let me hear from you then.
Well, love and compassion are most powerful energies that empaths and sensitive people are extremely open to. And love is the healing energy. And so one of the techniques I discuss in the book is putting your hand over your heart center or your heart chakra in the middle of your chest, focusing on something really beautiful and positive, that you love, such as the ocean or a flower or a child, and just breathing and letting your heart open so you could generate the energy of love, where it's a particular subtle energy that sensitive people and all people, if they want to tune into it. And it's learning how to summon the healing energy in your own body so that you can feel it yourself and benefit, and also share it with others. As I know, before patients, I sit and meditate on my heart and on loving kindness to be able to generate it in my body and also send it out to the room. So empaths and sensitive people are extremely sensitive to energy of their environment. And they can feel if there's a lot of stress or angst in the room versus if you walk into a room that's clear and full of love. And I think that's part of being a healer, is generating that positive energy in the space where you see people, you see your patients.
You mentioned earlier that the most important purpose in life was the learning and self-development. Where does that fit into with another very important purpose, which you obviously live by, which is helping other human beings? I would think that you certainly have that purpose probably as strongly as your personal growth purpose.
It's not so much personal growth, it's growth of my soul, and sometimes under that umbrella is helping others. By being a psychiatrist all these years, by seeing so many patients over the years, every type of person you could imagine, that's part of my soul growth. So my service to others and my desire to help in that way is part of my own soul growth. So I don't see it as something different.
You see it as one and the same?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting emphasis. Maybe it's partly the field marshal in me that probably wants to put in some ways the purpose of giving here on earth, and sharing love and increasing the amount of love on earth. I think of that probably as more my purpose than it's a little different than what you're expressing, but I think it's probably just eventually the same thing.
Yeah, because I believe that you come here alone, you leave here alone, and in the meantime you get to meet beautiful people and have relationships, hopefully where you're generating love, and you take what you've learned, the growth, the love, the transcendence of pain and hatred and revenge and regrets and resentments, all of that, which is part of the work, where you take that growth with you wherever your journey goes next. And I do believe this is, we're not only here. I don't know, your listeners may or may not believe that. Each person is totally different. But I believe that the work that you do on yourself and the suffering you've been through, and especially if you're, sensitive and empathic and never been understood and just feel overwhelmed by emotions, and you could turn that around into, as you said, a warrior. I have a blog, it's called Empath Warrior. Where you
oh my gosh, I didn't notice that. Would you send that to me?
Strong.
Huh?
Sensitive and strong.
All right. Well, would you send me that? Maybe that should go up on my website in your honored blogger portion of the website.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to send that to you.
Yeah, send that to me. Yeah.
But that's
you
the
mentioned something that I would love to hear you talk about, and I approach it the same way you do. Is Yeah, I'm very hesitant to talk about some of the larger cosmic feelings or thoughts I may have, but you started to talk about a more expansive thought about your soul's travel, and I would love to hear what you feel.
I feel that we're all souls, mind, body, and spirit, and that our souls are developing, towards light and towards love, and learning from suffering. And this Earth planet offers us certain lessons here, and we have certain choices to make here. And the suffering that you do, or the pain that you go through, is not for naught. It's something that we all have. Everybody has suffering. A psychiatrist has suffering. President of the United States has suffering. Everybody, has suffering, and we need to deal with it and begin to heal, through the powers of love and self-compassion. For instance, empaths tend to be a bit overly serious, and
that's Ginger. Ginger is the most serious person. She has to be told when a joke is being expressed because she takes everything seriously,
right,
including her husband, which is wonderful.
Right. Yeah. And so, it's one thing to focus on for empaths to look at the lightness of being, in the world, that you can be happy and miserable at the same time, where I can be happy with myself and who I am as a person and yet miserable with a particular situation. So, you can be both. You can hold both. You can hold many things, if you're open to it. And grounding yourself as an empath is very important. Learning meditation, learning earthing, going out and being in nature and the earth, learning how to breathe instead of holding your breath, conscious breathing. All of these grounding exercises. And, for me, meditation is the one that's most important, where if I'm on sensory overload or if I'm thrown off by something, I'll go to my sacred space and sit there and breathe, meditate, center myself, and start over again. Find my center. That's one of the key elements of being an empath that I work with my patients. And I also want to say, for those on the West Coast, or if you want to travel, I'm giving a workshop for healthcare professionals who are empaths, March 8th through 10th at Multiversity in Santa Cruz, California. And the information is on my website, drjudithorloff.com. And so the centering technique is very important. Otherwise, there's so much coming at you too fast that empaths can go on overwhelm. And sensory overload is extremely painful, where the lights are too bright and the sounds are too loud and people's voices seem endless and the talking is just, too much. And so at those points, you need to have alone time, reduce your sensory stimulation, meditate, take a bath, but bring your system down. If an empath doesn't do that, it can spiral and it can get a lot worse. And it could turn into, quote, panic attacks, which that's how you'd be diagnosed as opposed to energy overload, if you went to an emergency room. And so it's up to empaths to be able to notice the first signs of feeling that sensory overload or overstimulation so you could make immediate corrections for it.
Do you believe that we enter into other lives, other bodies? Do you believe in heaven? What is your idea about eternity?
It's getting closer.
Eternity is getting closer?
Yes, as we age, and if we're blessed to have lots of years behind us, we get closer to what that is. So
you believe there is a great meaning beyond the individual life or beyond this travel time?
This travel is what is important now. Where we go afterwards, I don't know for sure, but what I do know is that love is powerful and that the soul is yearning to develop itself and be free. And how we develop that, and the spirit that we brought into this life goes with us after we leave the body. And it's interesting because I always, tell people if you're not sure there's a spirit in the body, it's interesting to look at dead bodies, because the dead body is very plastic. It looks like a wax museum. It doesn't even look real, compared to an alive body that's infused with spirit and energy, and you can see the spark of life in it. So it's not morbid to me. It's just about the belief in spirit, that whatever you're going through, there's a reason for it. And you can, with help, if need be, to be able to find yourself again. And if you're an empath and you're suffering and exhausted and feeling other people's emotions, you just start at step one. Am I an empath? All right, fine. Now, how do I learn new coping skills to deal with this? And you just start at the beginning. Maybe, I have empaths who come to me who are 90 years old. They say, oh my God, I finally found out what I am. And other empaths that are 16. So it just depends when you hear about the information if you relate to it. But if you do relate to it, or you have a family member who's an empath, or someone you love is an empath, it will help you understand them better.
This is, I think, all very useful, and it's amazingly practical, folks. When a year ago we invited Ginger's mom to come stay with us. She mentioned this, I think, on the air before. And during the past year, it was very important when Ginger came upon Judith Orloff. And we are talking, if you just tuned in, to Judith Orloff, a psychiatrist, when she came upon the Empath Survival Guide, because she was taking on a lot of moms struggling in a way she didn't understand, and she was very confused, because here she has this new person in the environment, a very strong person, but somebody who was going through a tremendous traumatic period at age 94. And incidentally, folks, Mom is doing beautifully. Any place else she would have been probably diagnosed with, some fatal disorder or whatever. And she's just doing as well or better than ever now, with a lot of love, a lot of support, some physical rehab. I mean, love and relationship, folks, it transforms people to be loved and to have a loving relationship and environment to be in. And her progress, Mom's, she's reversed things that, you're supposed to just happen and then die. And she's just cognitively functioning better. She's doing better, and physically, and in part because we, of the kind of rehab help she had, which incidentally was paid for, that physical help by Medicare. Mm-hmm. So very, very important, the things we're talking about, the very practical things. I'd like to bring in one guest, and I want to introduce Judith to Sarah, who is often a caller on the show and has contributed so much that Judith, I ended up making her a full guest on one of the shows. And I'll let Sarah introduce herself to you as she might like to. Hi, Sarah. Glad to have you here, Breggin. And meet Judith Orloff.
Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to meet you, Dr. Orloff.
Oh, hi, Sarah.
Like Dr. Breggin said, I am a super fan, and I actually live just south of you, down in San Diego. And it's so refreshing for me to hear psychiatrists discuss empathy and empaths in this nature. I think all too often they pathologize this kind of experience. And I know that that's definitely what happened to me with my experience in the mental health system.
Yeah,
well, give a one or two sentence summary. I don't mind people hearing again about what you went through, and a one or two sentence summary about where you are today.
Okay. Well, I was I experienced anxiety, which progressed to anxiety when I was in elementary school, which progressed to depression in middle school and high school, and then progressed to mania, and then progressed to my first psychotic break when I was 23. From there, I went into the mental health system, and I cycled through 37 different combinations of medications and more than 116 ECT treatments. I lost 36 years of my life because of the ECT treatments. I was able to get off of all of the medications and address a lot of the issues that had caused some of the symptoms that I was experiencing by changing my diet and addressing trauma in my life. And I was able to go back to school, get re-educated. I became a rehabilitation counselor. I specialize in psychiatric rehabilitation. And I taught for 4 years at San Diego State University. And now I hang out with Dr. Breggin on his radio hour.
Fantastic.
I think that Sarah, that one of the great lessons of your life is that we have a spirit, we have a soul. And because your brain has gone through a battering that one would think would wipe out empathy from an individual's life, wipe out caring from an individual's life, especially over 100 ECT. And yet here you are. And it's a miracle, and it's a miracle. I think that is a testimony to not just your human spirit, but to the human spirit. Do you have any thoughts, anything you wanted to share, Judith?
Well, just to acknowledge your courage and the stamina of your spirit and your dedication to your own self and your own growth and keeping moving towards the light and your own empathy and caring for others. It's beautiful.
Thanks for calling in, Sarah. And
you bet. It's my pleasure.
Is there anything you wanted to ask Dr. Orloff to expand on, anything that you might be interested in?
Oh, Dr. Orloff, I just found it fascinating. I wasn't aware. I mean, I'm only recently learning about being an empath. And a lot of what Dr. Breggin said about how the medication and the ECT can destroy that empathy, I really feel that it's truly like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The more your body is under duress, the less you're able to pick from the top of the tree, so to speak. And so it's just been really interesting for me to relearn and reconnect with the spiritual aspects of love and feeling connected to those around me. And when I was stuck in the system, I was, for 12 years, I was essentially lost to society, bouncing from group home to group home. And part of that was because I was so influenced by all of the negative behaviors and negative emotions of the people who I was living with that it just felt unsafe and very, very overwhelming and scary. And so when I finally, one of the things that pushed me forward in recovery was I was finally able to meet someone who was willing to rent a room to me. And she was a very compassionate, kind, spiritually founded nurse. And it was like I walked into her home and my heart relaxed, and I realized I was in a
that's
safe place.
great.
Sarah, thank you for calling. I want to go to, thank you very, very, very much for calling. I want to go to Phyllis, whom I actually mentioned at the beginning of this show, I believe, because she wrote me something very lovely, and I wrote back to her and wanted, I spoke to her on the show today and said that I wanted her to go back and listen to Terry Lynch's show, which was on the 6th of February. Terry was on the 6th of February. And by the way, go to Breggin.com, Breggin.com, look up the radio show in the archives. So Phyllis, hi, welcome, and let me introduce you to Judith Orloff.
Hi, Phyllis.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Thank you very much. I wrote Dr. Breggin a letter about love. Oh. Okay. Hi, Dr. Orloff. How are you?
Hi.
I'm in the middle of your book. I have to
great.
turn down my sound. Just a minute. I'm getting an echo. Dr. Breggin a letter about... Okay, I'm sorry. I was getting two sounds here. I love your book. I wrote Dr. Breggin a letter about love, and I have been a social worker in private practice for about 25 years. And thank you. And I recently had some adversities in my own life, and I just have a quick question for you and Dr. Breggin. Is there any way I can have a session with you, both of you, over the phone? Because I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I cannot, just fly over to Los Angeles or Boston. And I'm wondering, if I could have a session with either of you on the phone.
Sarah, hi. Phyllis?
Yes, hi.
Hi, yes, I give phone sessions. You can go to my website or contact my assistant, Rhonda, at judithorloff.com.
Okay.
And so, yes, it's possible. I do phone sessions with patients all the time internationally, so that's definitely possible. So, just give her send her an email and say we talked on.
I'm on, by the way,
show.
folks. I've been missing for a while. Has the show been going on? Have you two been talking?
Yes, we have.
Yes, we have.
Oh, God bless you both. I lost Skype for 4 minutes, I think. And you didn't even know I was gone. You guys are having a very good time, and I'm going to check now with this engineer. Go on with your conversation. I'm going to check with the engineer now and find out if the show went on. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
Phyllis just asked if either of us do sessions over the phone, and I couldn't speak for you or Skype, but I do offer that, and you can check on my website, drjudithorloff.com, or send my assistant, Rhonda, at judithorloff.com an email and just say that you heard me on Peter Breggin's show. And so, yes, that is possible.
Okay, that's great. And I have been aware of another person, Dr. Elaine Aaron, who wrote a book called The Highly Sensitive Person, and was aware of that for the last 20 years. But I just want to comment before the show ends that being an empath and a highly sensitive person is very challenging right now in these, I don't want to get political, but in these political times, it's even scarier. You have your own personal, issues and problems and challenges in life, but you turn on CNN or any show and you're deluged with, lots of problems and worries and Medicare and all of that stuff. So I just wonder if either of you could comment on that, what it's like to be a human being now in 2019.
Yeah, it's extremely stressful. And I suggest to my patients not to, watch the cable news or any news, certainly before they go to sleep, and limit the amount that comes in. You could have just enough to be informed. But what happens is if you become addicted to the news cycles, that you might get exhausted as an empath. You might start feeling the depression and anxiety coming through the media, and that's not healthy. And so it's a time of increased trauma and stress. I recently took a trip to Hawaii, and just leaving the mainland of the U.S., I felt the tension level go down so much. You know, the United States, I haven't been to other parts of the world recently, but the United States is holding so much tension and stress as a country. It's overwhelming for empaths. And so all the more reason to meditate, to ground yourself, to focus on the extraordinary nature of simple things, to give and receive love in your own sphere, to breathe, to not forget to look up at all the stars and the universe and the magnificence, you know, that's occurring too.
Yeah, I think it's very important to know that the world has always been an extremely difficult place for human beings.
That's true.
And I'm glad you have the same response. And in many ways, this is the best of times. I mean, we live in safer communities than the world has ever known before. We evolved as a species that was largely limited to extended families scratching a living by hunting and gathering and being nomadic. That's the background we come from.
Right.
And in parallel with what Judith is saying, and we got a tremendous amount of love and empathy from each other. All indications are in that direction. That's what enabled a band of between 5 and 30 people to survive, to kill large animals, to gather enough, to tend to the wounded, to fight if necessary, if attacked, and so on. And I just find it very health-giving not to get caught up into this is the worst of times, when in actually many ways right now the best of times. We got most full employment in the history of almost of the country now, for blacks, for women, for Hispanics, for everybody almost. We're in fewer wars right now than we've been in a long, long time, big wars. So, look at both sides. Don't believe everything you're hearing in the news. Think about it for yourself. And ultimately, I do think, I agree so much with Judith, that the area that we can find joy and love in is always here, as long as there are other people, as long as there's nature, as long as we have a concept of God or goodness or spirituality. This is a good time to be alive. Judith Orloff, I hear the music starting. Phyllis, thank you for calling in. Thank you both for handling the show while when my Skype died for 5 minutes and not even knowing it. Bless you both. Thank you. And thanks to Sarah, too, and my wonderful, wonderful audience. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.